Thank you so much for joining us today, Paul. Paul is joining us to discuss his personal journey on climate change and his current work to educate the public to understand that sunlight reflection methods will be needed to address the situation of emission reduction and greenhouse gas removals that are not adding up. Particularly, Paul has been influential through his Substack, which is called Inevitable and Obvious, and it has several articles on his analysis of how the maths don't add up. I think it's well worth your time to join Paul's Substack to follow his work. As I mentioned in the announcement, Paul is the co-founder of Nori, the first carbon removal marketplace, and I'm sure he will mention that as part of his journey to where he is now. And Paul, I think that it'll be very interesting as you present some of your ideas to talk to us about the new initiatives that you are developing to mobilize more support for comprehensive approaches to global heating. So with that, Paul, I yield the floor to you, and you can present your remarks for however long that you need, perhaps 20, 25 minutes. And then we usually have a stimulating discussion amongst the members with our speakers. So Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dennis. And thank you, everybody, for having me. I see I've met a lot of you in recent weeks. So thank you for having me here. Yeah, so my background is originally in computer engineering. That's what I studied. And in 2015, I became interested in climate change, more from the perspective of wondering, hey, why aren't we talking about pulling carbon dioxide back out of the atmosphere? I had no background. I didn't know any of the intellectual history or anything like that. I was just sort of curious, like what's going on in that space. And as I started to research it and realize, oh, okay, there are only a couple of research centers and maybe a handful of different companies that are working on this. It was mainly the direct air capture companies like Climeworks back then. I realized, well, that this is a problem because we very much need to have an industry that is capable of reaching planetary global scale to remove massive amounts, like over 1 trillion tons of CO2. And I founded a meetup group in Seattle to find other people who were interested in this. And it was like 15 people, and we would meet monthly and trade papers and books and anything that we could find about carbon removal, which we didn't even have the term for that initially. I was calling it carbon capture, and then eventually the nomenclature kind of stuck later on. In 2017, I co-founded with several other people Nori, which was the first carbon removal marketplace. And the idea behind Nori was we wanted to create the financial infrastructure that would make large-scale carbon removal possible and really truly incentivize it. So I don't often talk about this part anymore, but there was a whole cryptocurrency incentive model built into it, trying to make it valuable for people to remove carbon. And that's some of my writing at my Substack has been trying to make the same point of, if carbon removal is simply a cost center, then no wonder companies don't want to pay for it, and certainly governments don't want to pay for it. But if you can figure out how to flip it into something that is actually generating and returning value for people, then let's see how that goes. So we ran Nori for 7 years. I raised about $20 million. We grew to about 30 people at one point, and we were primarily working with farmers in the US doing regenerative agriculture, so soil carbon sequestration. We built a partnership with Bayer, Bayer Crop Science, and that went live, and we started selling credits from Bayer in 2023. In 23, I had hired a new CEO, and then he ended up only having about 12 months of runway before we ran out of cash in mid 24, right when the venture capital market was pulling back from anything going on in the voluntary carbon market space. There was a lot of concern, especially about the election in the US that year, which turned out to be fair, turned out to be correct. And so we unfortunately had to shut the company down, sell off our IP, and that was that. It was unfortunate because everything was going well. We were positioned well, and I thought we could have continued to make a large impact. I took some time off, and then around the end of 24 and at the beginning of this year, I was having conversations with some of my peers in the CDR space and growing really frustrated with the current pace of carbon removal and lack of interest from within the industry for reforming itself, and certainly about the lack of interest outside. And I wrote an article in March that was called "We Will Not Achieve Gigaton Carbon Removal," and that really made some waves within the CDR space. And it made me start thinking about like, okay, if we're really not going to do this, if we're not like we're nowhere near the pace that we need to be going for carbon removal, I'll come back to that in a second. Then what are we doing to buy more time for this? Because things are bad. And I know all of you here understand this in many ways much better than I do. But the acceleration in warming has completely changed my mental model for how I see this. The way that I thought about climate change back in 2015, 10 years ago, was okay, we still have time to start turning the corner on emissions cuts. And if we really truly scale up carbon removal, I mean, I was in my pitch decks in 2017 through 19 or so, assuming that we would be as an industry at a gigaton per year by 2025. And we're we're at best at single digit millions today. So we're nowhere near there. And if you look at some estimates on how we could actually get to scale up, so if the IPCC's target is reaching 10 billion tons per year by 2050, then if you look at like the Rocky Mountain Institute put out a report earlier this year with the Bezos Earth Fund, kind of trying to forecast out what would that look like. And they have this hypothetical S curve in there, and I've shared this chart a bunch of times. It was in that presentation yesterday of showing if you were to get there, you would need to be on pace for somewhere around maybe 200 to 300 million tons per year by 2030. Well, that's definitely not going to happen. We're only 4 years from that. So we're definitely not on pace for that. And then, of course, emissions reductions haven't happened. We've maybe we've peaked, but it doesn't seem like it. Hard to say. So that pushed me more and more into what are we doing? What can we do to cool things down and buy more time? So I spent the next several months meeting with as many people as I could find in the SRM space. All of everyone who you guys would know of, all the leaders of the different organizations that are very publicly working on this, and asking a question: what do you think an entrepreneur like me could contribute to this space? Because I don't really think that this should be commercialized. And I have a lot of concerns about some of the commercial approaches that are being taken. Like certainly there's room for private sector stuff, but that's just not what I see my role being. And I kept noticing that when I would read through the like mission statements or objectives or anything of these different organizations, or I'd see people talk in public, they would say effectively, like, we think research is necessary and responsible and we should do it, but we're not advocating for deployment. And if we find out that we don't think that we should deploy, then that's okay. We're okay with that. That's fine. And I thought that was really strange because that's just how I know you all know this. Like how do you go this far down the rabbit hole in understanding the actual reality of the situation and then walk away from that thinking, okay, well, I guess we're just going to have to stick to plan A. And that's I view this much more as if there are trade-offs that we find to be unacceptable, which is totally plausible and in fact very likely, I would say, then we don't take those trade-offs. But that doesn't mean that we can stop trying to solve the problem. We have to find ways to do this. And maybe that's just my engineering mindset compared to like a more academic mindset, but that's how I view the world. So I firmly believe cooling is necessary. Cooling has to happen. And I don't think that we should like even if we had the planes and all that stuff, I would not say that we do SAI tomorrow because there are strategic questions that we have to answer first, and there's all sorts of governance issues and all of that, everything you all know. But I think that it is inevitable, and we must figure out how to overcome those challenges. So that's my operating belief. That's been the case since probably June of this year. I always assumed previously that geoengineering would be necessary long term, but I also thought that 1.5 was much further out than it actually is. So things have changed. I went then in July to the Global Tipping Points conference, and I wrote an article about this. That was a radicalizing experience for me, let me tell you, because after 2 days of paper presentations about AMOC collapse, Amazon dieback, ice sheet melt, and so on, it was on day three, the morning of. So picture this: there are like 400, maybe some of you were there. I know Herb was there. I don't know if he's on the call. Um, uh, there were maybe 400 people. It was very academic, mostly scientists. And I, during a coffee break, I introduced myself to some scientists and said, "Hey, I'm coming from the carbon removal world, and I think it's really interesting. Like after 2 days of this, I still haven't heard anyone use the G word, meaning geoengineering." And he looked at me and he said, "Oh, well, carbon removal and geoengineering are just cover for oil and gas. So you're not going to find anyone here who is interested in that." And my jaw dropped. And like setting aside the whole moral hazard around geoengineering stuff, I guess that's more complicated. But for carbon removal, like in 2018, the IPCC said that this was necessary and we have to do this. So, how are you in 2025 advocating that carbon removal is cover for oil and gas? It makes no sense to me. So that really led me to believe, wow, there's like I really have to do something about this. This is a serious issue. So um, going back to when I was getting Nori off the ground, we recognized that at the time, no one knew anything about carbon removal. If I were to talk to an investor, they didn't know anything about it. I would have to spend a lot of time getting them up to speed on how this carbon removal is different from carbon offsetting. Carbon offsets have been about carbon avoidance. This is an entirely new category. Customers are going to want this more than offsets, and like all of that education stuff, which makes it really hard to raise money. So what we did was we launched initially, the very first thing that we did as a company was we launched a podcast. We called it Reversing Climate Change. And we were interviewing people who are working in the space. I met Brian von Hertzen that way very early on, as he was an early guest on our show. And then we hosted a conference in 2018 that we called Reversipalooza. And this was in Seattle. It was about 100 people attending. We had people ranging from sustainability professionals to scientists and researchers to other entrepreneurs to farmers and ranchers. And we presented a vision where we said, one, carbon removal is necessary. Two, it is possible. And three, here is our vision for how we want to see this industry grow. And that really helped kick off a bunch of activity in the space. And I mean, to this day, I've been told by literally dozens of people that they are working in carbon removal because of something that we produced or are put out there in terms of our shows or our other content, or like me giving a talk somewhere or something like that. So I learned a lot of lessons about what it takes to build a category. This is language we would use in the startup world, like category creation or category definition, where think of it like this, like when Uber and Lyft, I mean, actually Lyft came first, but when Uber and Lyft came out and you have the new concept of ride share, like we know what ride sharing is now, but that it was more like cars for hire back then. And so they had to carve out this entirely new category where they could be the dominant player in that. That's what category definition is. And we had to do that for carbon removal, and we have to do that for cooling interventions now. So since July, I've been working with a strategy agency. I've been writing about my thinking about this and continuing to meet with more people in the SRM space. The gap I've identified is that no one knows about any of this, No one knows about tipping point risks. No one knows about the acceleration of warming. No one knows about sulfur aerosol unmasking. No one knows about, frankly, how all of this fits in together. No one knows that carbon removal isn't scaling. No one really knows much about emissions reduction and the fact that we haven't reached peak emissions. That said, for people who are working in the SRM space, what I have noticed is they're beset on all sides. You have the climate scientists and activists who oppose SRM because it's anything other than mitigation. And then you have the chemtrails conspiracy theorists on the other side. And so it makes sense to me that these different organizations have been taking the approach of research yes, deployment no, because that's the only like narrow lane that they can actually like walk down. And they're afraid of losing funding or academic reputation or whatever. That's all valid. I think everyone working in the space is doing fantastic work. I'm incredibly impressed by what I see. But we lack cultural permission space. So if imagine a policymaker or a politician somewhere getting a briefing on this, and uh, they find intervention work, or they find even just like knowing about tipping point risks actionable and compelling. They can't really go talk about that in public, at least certainly not in the US, and probably not the case in other parts of the world too, because of this narrow lane. If you're familiar with the Overton window concept, the Overton window is okay. So good. I'll explain. The Overton window was a proposal. I don't remember Overton's first name, but a proposal that there is a narrow acceptable range of political views that could be held on a specific topic. And if you are outside of that acceptable range, which is like based off of cultural norms, then you are seen as an extremist or a radical or just weird. And so it's not considered as like plausible or real or possible. So the SRM and cooling interventions are not seen as within that Overton window. It's seen as either conspiratorial or the radically wrong thing to do. We have to move that. So that's what I'm working on. And I'm getting a new organization off the ground, a new nonprofit called Light the Beacons. That's actually a Lord of the Rings reference, but you don't have to know the reference to get it. The idea is that we want to be the ones who help build this cultural permission space. I've been reading a book recently called How to Fall in Love with the Future by Rob Hopkins, which I would recommend to all of you. And he talks about how if we want to do huge things in the future, we have to have a vision for that we can believe in. He tells a story in there about how in 1865, Jules Verne published From the Earth to the Moon. And that was really the first novel that depicted anything like space travel in that way. And he actually got a bunch of things correct, remarkably. It was in the book, there was a 3-person crew. The rocket took off from Florida. It landed in the ocean. It was made of aluminum. And so that's crazy. But when John Kennedy gives his speech about choosing to go to the moon, not because it's easy, but because it's hard, in I think 62, 7 years later, we landed on the moon. But there was 100 years prior to that of belief. And that meant people dreaming of this, longing for it, going to study math and science and engineering and other related fields in order to create generations of people who were capable of doing that. So that vision has to come first. The belief that we can do hard, complicated, challenging, hugely grand things has to come first. And that's what I want to build. So the way that we're going to do this is our organization is going to be focused on sort of 3 pillars. The first is thought leadership stuff. So this is, me coming here and presenting to you right now, and the Substack, and I'll do a podcast and other things like that. The second is a product studio. So I mentioned earlier, I come from a software background. And with AI development tools these days, you can produce stuff very, very rapidly. And so I want to be publishing apps and games and data visualizations, educational tools, anything that we can think of that's going to be effective in getting this stuff to land. When it comes to cultural artifacts, we have Ministry for the Future as a sci-fi novel that depicts like how to solve climate change in the 21st century, and that's more or less it. I mean, I could count on one hand the number of books that cover this topic. We certainly don't really have any movies. There's one TV show, Extrapolations, which I won't recommend to you because it's very depressing. Um, I have this sort of grand social theory that in the late 90s, when the Sopranos TV show came out, and we all of a sudden every story being told was about the anti-hero, and it's led to a society that is very cynical and nihilistic and bleak, and we don't believe in the future anymore. And I grew up watching Star Trek The Next Generation. And so, I mean, in grad school, I wrote an essay on the leadership principles of Jean-Luc Picard. So that's the vision that I want to see for the future. So we need to be collaborating with writers and artists and filmmakers and video game designers. And I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but there are so many YouTube streamers who have like 20 million followers, Twitch streamers that just play video games in front of 5 million people. Like that's huge. So I want to go to the platforms and the channels where people are, where we've been moving from a literary society to a much more oral society. So that means short form video. That means that people trust the sorts of the individuals who have platforms have so much more trust than a like mainstream institution or newspaper or any sort of academic university or anything like that. We have to go to where the people are and where the trust is built and work with them. So I want to see I want to see like romance novels where the characters are like they're installing the space mirrors, but that's not what the story is about. The story is about their relationship. I want to see video games where people are playing strategy games that are implementing these things, figuring out how to tackle the thorny problems that exist when it comes to any sort of deployment of SRM. That's what I want to see, because this needs to be like just part of the cultural ether. And when we get there, then we will start to see much more buy-in. And, in the short term, some of the goals from the people that I've been talking to in the space are like, we need much more funding. Like there are only a handful of foundations that are funding basically all of the work, and they're nearly tapped out. There are only so many PhDs who are capable of doing the research. There are only so many people working on this, and in part because it's really hard to get capital, it's really hard to do this. I have talked to multiple startup founders in recent weeks who are working on sort of related like weather modification stuff, like how do we break up like superstorm hurricanes and that kind of thing. They're in stealth and they don't want to be public yet, because they're literally concerned about the safety of their employees. Like that needs to change. This needs to be happening much, much more out in the open. So that's sort of the perspective that I have on this. And where we are right now is my co-founder of this is named Katie Soderlund. She was my chief of staff at Nori, so we have a long history of working together and talking with several other people, kind of waiting in the wings, ready to get going. I'm working on fundraising right now. So if you know anyone rich who wants to see cultural engagement on cooling interventions, send them my way. And yeah, that's I'll stop there. How about that, Dennis?
Fantastic. I think it's a real good start for a very interesting discussion. Why don't those with queries or comments put their hand up so we can start our process? We don't have any hands up right now. So I just wanted to mention, Paul, uh, you said you had three focus areas: thought
Yes.
leadership, a product studio,
Mhm.
and the third one I didn't catch.
Oh yeah, I just didn't name it. Collaboration with storytellers.
Okay. Okay. Oh, well,
Yeah.
that's an interesting one from our perspective because we have an initiative on storytelling and a real professional, Jules Pretty, who I must introduce to you, who
Cool.
is who has been doing wonderful work on storytelling and gave us a master class on that subject.
Hmm.
So I'll connect you with him because we also believe that's an important part of our agenda. We have some hands up now. Let me start with Robert Tulip. Robert,
Thank you,
uh,
Paul. That was really brilliant, actually. So I find it quite inspiring the perspective that you've shared, and I just wanted to share some of my trajectory on this. And
Hmm.
my interest in this whole space started back in 2007. So I was working for the Australian government on a forest climate initiative, and uh, on the idea that reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation would be an effective climate solution. And so I just did the numbers, and and it rapidly emerged that method. Well, firstly, there's the problem of that you pay poor people to retain a forest, and then when you stop paying, then
Sure.
they don't
Yeah.
um, keep the forest. But even more than that, that it doesn't have an effect on temperature, and and
Yep.
so it led me to the immediate question of what is required to actually slow global warming, and that led me into the whole space of ocean-based algae production as something that would be feasible, that would be required on the scale to remove the amount of excess CO2 that is
Hmm.
causing warming. Whereas in all of the decarbonisation efforts simply do not scale. And
Yeah.
so to me, that was a really simple observation. But as a result of those observations, I was essentially disinvited from the conference discussing
Yeah.
the topic, and then basically shunned. So
Sure.
uh,
Yeah.
and it's only in hindsight that I can sort of understand some of the psychology of that. That people's hopes are vested in um, emission reduction, and sort of small scale. People's psychology doesn't engage with global thinking, and
Hmm.
so
No.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'll let.
There's an ideology to it, and that's been especially interesting to me. Thinking back to what I was saying, my experience at the Tipping Points conference was, uh, it's it is ideology, and it's almost a religion to think, and I get where they're coming from. It's like if you believe that if we just maintain laser focus on emissions reduction, that then we'll get that. But at the same time, you have to acknowledge, and that's why it's so baffling to me that the tipping points research community can on the one hand talk about these risks being so ever present, but then like can't make the leap to that. And I've uh, Herb's interview with Johan Rockstrom at the conference, asking him about this, and Johan's response of saying, "Well, it's just too risky." It's like I think back to because I totally understand what you're saying, Robert, and it is really frustrating, and I feel fortunate that I'm in like independent position now where I can just say what I think about this, and I'm not even representing like a startup that had shareholders and all of that. Um, but when I um, oh, I lost my train of thought. Uh,
Yeah, well, so
uh,
the scale of cultural change that is required
yeah.
to achieve the global thinking, um, that like just you made the point really well, that if we start from the perspective of, okay, heat is a problem and
Hmm.
got to get rid of it, so
Yeah.
so that leads to the point that deployment is actually necessary. So the
Yeah.
risks have to be understood and managed. Like just
Yeah,
saying there are risks is not at all a reason to say that that we can avoid the necessity of deployment.
that's right. Yep, I agree.
I'm happy to move on. I'll just leave that as a
Dennis, you're
comment.
muted.
Sorry. Yes, thank you, Robert. Let's move on to Ron, then Sev, then Mike. Ron?
Yeah, no, thank you, Paul, and I'm glad you're here. I know when you do one of your Substacks, Robert and I kind of piled on.
Yeah, I remember.
I think this is really great that it's wonderful that you're doing this. It's extremely complimentary. It's perfect complement actually to
Mhm.
what we've been doing because I think we've been trying to expand the Overton window, but primarily in this kind of, more scientific, older, mostly older,
Yeah,
scientific and kind of policy expert and activist community. You're doing exactly the same thing, saying, look, you've got to start. We need deployment now. And most recently, we're actually trying to work on an open letter to make, which I hope to carry to the AGU 2025, and try and I and Mike McCracken and Greg Slater put together, or are working on, and the people in the urgent, we call it the urgent climate cooling response group, kind of working on this. Uh, you saw some of that in the conference. If I don't know if you
hmm
caught that presentation, but but you're right. What we're missing is the sort of more broader popular appeal to scale this out. You're talking about scaling. Scale it up, and particularly to younger folks and people that are not already, kind of tuned in to the dire situation that we face. I mean, I've been trying to do it in my own family, and anyway.
right.
So, and I actually have a daughter who's a climate scientist, so I think she's obviously on board. But anyway, and the other point I wanted to make is um, that the other kind of interesting point is I come from the radical economics community. So I'm kind of
Okay,
used to battling a dominant hegemony, which is neoclassical economics. It's like
sure.
99% of the economics departments in the world will teach you a single model that many of us are saying, no, that's just ideology. That model is, it represents a kind of Adam Smithian perspective, although it's not even really what Adam Smith was, that is a particular mindset that legitimates a particular social system. But anyway, so that but we need to really we can do better than that. So I've been using the term guerrillas. We're sort of the guerrillas. And the other thing is that the perspective that you mentioned, that you are able to say things that other people can't because you're not dependent on funders and career reputation. You already have a reputation. You already
hmm
so we are, many of us, or I would say, are in a similar situation, and we find that we're saying things that other journalists and whatnot who've talked privately with people, and anonymously are saying, oh yeah, there's a large group of people, climate scientists, that are actually have similar beliefs, but are loath, cannot feel that they cannot express that in public for all the reasons that you explained. So, again, I think this would be great. This would be perfectly complementary, and exactly what I think is needed. The one caveat I would say is that, well, I don't want to, but we need to get all the popular support we can, but we can't wait. I think the urgency is such
I
that we
agree.
can't do
Yeah,
this thing where we need to, we have to have this perfect governance and all this stuff set up, and we have to have, 10 more years of research to make sure we nail down, we are saying, no, if you want to get, like, shave the peak by 2020, 35 or 2050, you really have to start engineering stuff now. We
today.
know it
Yeah.
works. So anyway, yeah, all
Yep.
this stuff. So
Yeah. No, I very much
anyway,
agree. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Ron.
Okay, thank you. And I don't know, Paula, if you had any reactions to Ron's comments before we go on.
I co-sign, agree. Like yes, I see it the same way.
Yes, and I think it just reinforces again the value of our looking for material ways that we can collaborate together. So you're
Yeah, certainly.
developing an organization. We are professionalizing, expanding our work, moving from a volunteer organization to hopefully a funded organization that can expand its work as well. So there's so much we can do together. I think we probably need to actually develop a plan of interaction that can provide the complementarities, because they certainly are complementary. I mean, you and your community and we are in a bit of a different space, socially and scientifically. So there's a lot we can. Right. Let's go back to our group. Sev is our next hand up. Sev, go ahead.
Yeah. Thanks, Dennis. I love the idea of the top-down grand vision work, but I also say don't forget the bottom-up stuff. We can do
tell me more.
small-scale trials in different island states and whatever, and if some of them pan out, then they can really bring that grand vision into the view of ordinary people. And so I'm saying, and I really like my idea of the buoyant flakes and the ocean brightening nanobubbles, which I think I've talked to you a bit about before.
Yes. Yeah. Oh no, I find that very compelling too. I think that I mean, if someone is learning about this for the first time through the context of SAI, it's pretty scary. And I can understand why people would. I can understand where the chemtrailers are coming from to a degree. And so I totally agree, Seb. I think that there is definitely something to the notion of like local or regional things, even just convincing people to paint roofs white, even if that's not actually having the temperature impact that we would want, it could have the political or cultural or like belief impact that actually makes it possible for the larger scale stuff. So I'm definitely on board and share that belief.
Thank you. And now we've reached Mike and then Meta, I believe. Yeah, Mike and Meta.
Okay. Hi, Paul. I want to go back to your CDR experience and ask a question.
Sure.
So there are a couple of people who are sort of thinking they can make profits out of getting carbon removal going.
Yep.
I mean, it's not from carbon scrubbing out of the atmosphere or anything. It's basically having let Mother Nature create some carbon, it's turning it into biochar. And that there's really a lot of potential there, because nature makes a lot of carbon over the year.
Yeah.
And so there's a big potential pool of carbon to draw from to turn into biochar. And so you make some money out of turning it into biochar because it gives off energy, potentially. You make some from selling the biochar as a soil nutrient, and you potentially make some from carbon credits of some kind, even though that's sort of an unfunded mandate. It's sort of a socially good thing that some groups will do. And so, I mean, Brian's one of those. In his proposal, he actually tries to grow the biomass, and that's what one would do in the ocean rather than somehow harvest it. But there is a fellow named Paul Caston. I don't know if you know him.
No.
He's the father of Sean Caston, who's a representative in Congress from outside Chicago, and Tom ran a company for many years making money by taking waste energy from industrial plants and putting it to use.
Yeah. Okay.
And so he's of the perspective of if you want something to spread, you got to make money out of it.
I completely agree with that.
And everything. And he was doing that. And they basically, when he got older, he sold his business or something. And Sean ran for Congress and won. But he's now doing it, and he has, or I assume still has, a grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture to do it in the Northwest, gathering waste lumber products.
Yeah. Okay.
So tree limbs and sawdust and whatever you want to do and do it or something. And he sort of thinks that, gee, if you can make money out of it, that's something that will spread around the world pretty quickly. If it can be done. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, it's a radically different cost model than the notion of I'm going to scrub it out of the atmosphere or something. So what are your thoughts on these other approaches?
So in the carbon removal world, there's this interesting paradigm that has developed since really 2019. I wrote about this in an article. I'll find it after this and put a link in. Essentially, when I started working in the space in 2017, and I mentioned that Reversipalooza conference, everyone there basically believed, hey, we should be focusing on doing carbon sequestration via nature-based processes. Why would you go in the direction of like direct air capture that uses a lot of energy and water when you've got forestry and biochar and soil carbon and mangrove wetland restoration and all of these things? That was the prevailing view that almost everyone held in the space. It was small. It was a small field at the time. In 2019, Stripe announced that for the first time, a company was going to exclusively purchase carbon removal as opposed to carbon offsets. So carbon offsets had previously been credits that were avoiding the creation of new emissions. So you might do like a dairy digester, or so instead of methane emissions, you get carbon emissions. You might do clean cook stoves. That was probably like the largest by market share. So Stripe came out and said, we're going to do carbon removal only. And at the time, I remember thinking, wow, this is amazing. This is way sooner than I thought would happen. You've got like a gigantic, very successful tech company saying that they want to do this. And so they were willing to pay any price per ton for carbon removal. They wanted to be catalytic. And they put together an advisory board and then opened up an RFP process. Naturally, at Nori, we submitted a response to the RFP we had just basically around that time gotten ready to do our first soil carbon farming projects. We had spent a couple of years building out the methodology, how we did measurement and verification. We submitted to that, and then their advisory board, which was maybe 6 different scientists in the field, came back and more or less pushed them in the direction of purchasing exclusively what would be called durable carbon removal credits. So durability in CDR refers to how long the sequestration can be guaranteed. And because of the way that the carbon accounting has worked at the corporate level, these companies have been purchasing this kind of stuff have been saying, look, if we're creating emissions that are ultimately sourced from fossil fuels, and so you're getting 1,000 years of radiative forcing from those emissions, if we're going to claim that we have offset and removed or negated those emissions, then we need to guarantee that the carbon that gets sequestered is sequestered for 1,000 years or more. And that has become the prevailing view among any buyer in this space because there aren't that many. So if you go to a website, cdr.fyi, it's a really good tracker that tracks all public announcements of carbon removal purchases. Now they're only tracking durable purchases. They have a separate one for nature-based stuff. I think it's like, it might have changed recently. Between 60 and 70% of all purchases are by Microsoft. So that's not really a market. It's a monopsony. It's one company purchasing. And so I went to this like closed door event in San Francisco during Climate Week in April. and it was just for sustainability leaders. So these are like chief sustainability officers at big name tech companies, and there were like 30 people in the room. And there was a panel up there, and they're talking about, the panel are experienced at buying carbon removals, and the people in the audience were not. And so the panel is saying, look, just copy what Microsoft's doing. Just look at what they're doing and do that. So that's how you get this situation where there's this groupthink around that. Now, I bring all of this context up to mention, going back to CDR.FYI, the vast majority of purchases in the durable space have been biochar. And the reason for that is because it's the only method that is actually scalable, that meets all of these requirements in the near term. So there are plenty of different direct air capture companies. Like Microsoft has, I don't remember the exact numbers, but Microsoft made a big purchase commitment with Heirloom, which is a DAC company. Microsoft has also been doing stuff on the nature-based side. Chestnut Carbon had a big deal with them earlier or last year. But biochar continues to lead the way because it is easy to measure. It's much more affordable. It's on the order of $100 to $300 per ton compared to $500 to $1,000 per ton for DAC. There are, of course, like different limitations around supply chains and stuff like that, but it is biochar is by far the most popular method for a company to purchase durable carbon credits today, if you're not Microsoft. Does that, I don't know if that answers your question, but that gives you some context.
Well, that's it. Yeah. I mean, sort of one of the other interesting trends I've seen is that new construction of homes and things is starting to be done by 3D printing of 3D printing of something that's sort of a concrete or whatever substance they use. It's a wonderful use, and sort of is coming in inexpensively. Is that a major source of use of wood that could be switched to biochar if one went to this different construction technique, or what are the major sources of wood that drive lumbering?
Well, as I understand it, I mean, this is not my area of expertise, but I know a lot of people whose expertise is in this field. And the way I understand it is, I have a former investor of mine here in Washington. I live in Seattle, and so here in Washington State, we have a large timber industry, and I have a former investor of mine who's working on setting up a biochar facility using waste sawdust from some timber mill somewhere, and it's like essentially free inputs, and then it's just energy cost to run it, and then he wants to sell carbon credits. I talked to him earlier this year. I don't know what the state of it is now. When it comes to construction materials, and there have been efforts, and there have been companies that have flared out and totally bombed trying to do this, but there's been talk around using this in construction materials and so on. It seems like an obvious application, but you run into a lot of permitting and policy issues there too. So there's no real like constituency for trying to push for that, except for, I would say, there's a group called the Carbon Leadership Forum, which was originally started here in Seattle out of the University of Washington. And they've been doing a lot around trying to create standards around embodied emissions and like, what does it take to actually, so there's LEED, which is the building that and the emissions from its operations, but there hasn't been stuff prior to this for what it takes to build. So I would suggest that if you want to learn more about that, I would look at CLF, Carbon Leadership Forum.
Okay, Mike, let's get back to the main theme of our discussions, which is actually about how do we educate and mobilize the global population on SRM. That's, I think, what Paul really intended to discuss today. Let's move on to Meta, and then we're back to, then Jonathan, Arya, Robert, and then I'll go back to Robert Tulip. Okay. Meta, please.
Thank you. Oh, I am so thrilled to hear this because, Paul, you are getting onto my territory. I wrote a book called Two Aspirants and a Comedy about how fiction is the source of cultural change. It's the best and the only really effective way of changing a culture. And I could take the rest of the hour easily for doing that, but I did put in the URL to a YouTube video that I did. I actually did with about 3 with this fellow who is a real master in using radio and television to convey stories that actually change public behavior. That is, they started with getting people to take courses in adult education. The real source of the technique is a man named Sabido, a Mexican who invented a whole technology for writing soap operas that over a period of a year would make enormous changes in the behavior of large sections of the population. I could tell you tons of stories about how effective that is. And but I have to caution you because on the one hand, it's really hard to get people with deep pockets to fund such a project. A very close friend of mine is Alexander Likotal, who was Gorbachev's press secretary. And I was thrilled by watching the West Wing because it really made some political changes. I could give stories about that, but my notion was, this was like 20 years ago, that if we just could make a drama, something like The West Wing, about the Kremlin, a very fine and progressive group of assistants to the president of the country, that they would be able to actually show political culture changing. They would take an issue, as the West Wing did, whatever was going on that week that was live, engaging and politically real, and tell a story about how the people in the White House, or in that case the Kremlin, would react to that and handle the issue. And he was agreed to this. So we went around. He had better contacts than I did, and we went around looking for producers, TV producers, who would get interested in doing such a thing, and we couldn't. However, nowadays you could do it yourself. And about a year ago, I got the idea. I got this camera, and if I had 3 or 4 more cameras on wheels, I could go around my building and I could make up a story about the people living in this building. It has to be a real drama. And you start off with the people with the prevailing opinions, and you take about a year to make them go through various things that gradually change their mind. At the end, you show the changes. And you could do that if you had some people who like to be actors and stuff. So I would suggest, if you have some friends, call me. I'd love to plan with you on how to actually do a show in which we could put it up on YouTube as a regular weekly drama from Healthy Planet Action Coalition, showing why people need to change their ideas about climate repair.
Cool. Thank you. What was the name of the book that you wrote on
It's
this?
called 2 Aspirins and a Comedy. And it was it's about how drama affects. You see, when you watch a drama, you empathize with the characters. And when the characters are going through significant pain, your own body creates hormones and all of the same pain, same distress that they're feeling. If they feel happy, you feel your body is actually, and it makes you healthier. There's a lot of research about health being can be triggered by imaginary things, which are simply, in this case, following the emotions of the people. I do still have arthritis.
I think we need to move on. But I think the key thing is that let's get you and Paul connected. And I'll send an email to Paul introducing you. Sounds like there's a wealth of things that you can discuss with regard to this area. And we in the broader membership are interested in this whole aspect of storytelling as well. So I think it will be something that we should really put high on our agenda as we go forward. But I see we have many other hands. I want to give people the chance to say to contribute. We have Jonathan, then Aria, then Robert Chris. Jonathan?
Thanks. Yeah, I don't know if you can see my avatar slide
I
on
can.
the thing. Yeah, so in trying to reach young people, I think it's important to put something into their hands. So there are several kits that we've developed where in the ones that you're seeing now, it's simply a good piece of foil rolled between two pieces of bamboo. And they can carry this and they can, do what they want with it, stick it in the ground in their backyard, start a conversation with their parents about how it reflects energy back to space. And the total cost is about $2 for a little
Mm-hmm.
kit like that. And then there's bigger kits as well. And I don't know if you're aware that when you calculate the equivalent carbon offset that reflection does, it doesn't have the same downside as something like planting a tree. It doesn't need 50 years or 100 years to produce its offset. It is an immediate effect, and a 10 by 10 mirror or mirrored foil facing the sky in the right way can offset 1 ton of CO2 equivalent per year in terms of heating. So that energy, once it's been reflected back to space, never comes back. And even if the device fails after a certain period of time, it's done its job during that time. So it's an instant, not waiting 20 years for a tree to grow. And it's also very potent. So it's just a matter of how many square meters of material you've got in terms of your offset. So it bypasses a lot of the problems with the offset, chemistry.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I hear you on that. The problem is getting buyers to pay for carbon credits, just as I was explaining with the context about the biochar stuff. It's so fraught and challenging and difficult, and buyers don't want to buy carbon offsets that have any risk associated with them, because the risk is that the Guardian is going to write some report that drags them for paying for forestry that didn't happen or something like that. So they've become so risk averse that they only want this like most durable long-term carbon removal. But then that's the most expensive kind of offset there is. So then this relates more to some of the, like Make Sunsets has been taking an approach with cooling credits. And I don't think that that's effective or going to like make any impact long term. I've also seen there's an like an Arctic sea ice preservation company, I can't remember the name, that was considering like selling cooling credits. I just think it's hard enough to sell carbon credits. I don't really see cooling credits being a viable pathway, unfortunately.
Right.
Companies of the world are too concerned about reputation.
You're still locked into the bias with the word carbon. Just step away from the word carbon for a minute and think about it as energy forcing. That's all we're really interested in.
I mean, I'm on board. Like I get it. It's just a matter of the expertise level of like a sustainability professional at like a large company that might have budget for this is nowhere near what you would think it is. And as I mentioned, they are risk averse. They're selling a cost center. So they're often dealing with a situation where maybe the CEO or CFO is like willing to throw them a bone because sustainability is good marketing. But if they don't actually like fully believe in it, then they're working uphill, and they have an entire job around metrics reporting and stuff like that. So trying to do any sort of campaign for paying for credits of any sort internally is a huge uphill battle, and is like a second job for them. So I would say that the structure of the system as it exists today, and I've been railing against this for a long time, believe me, but the structure of the system is not conducive to achieving any sort of scale with crediting, in my opinion.
Sure. Well, as a final note, in finance, there's a lot of ways that groups figure out how to get their money quickly. Like they produce a loan and then they immediately sell it the next day, and they get some money quickly. Even though if they held it for 30 years, they might have gotten more money. In the sense of reflectivity, you get your cooling immediately. and you don't have to wait for something to occur over time. So if that aspect can be used as an analogy, in terms of finance being the analogy, it might be more saleable.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, Jonathan, this is a subject we should have a whole meeting about, because it's a very unique and innovative way of looking at credits, and we haven't talked enough about that. But let's move on to Aria and then Robert. Chris.
Great. Hi. Yeah, you have to pardon me. I am driving. I think I should maintain signal. But this is right up my alley. I was an actress for like over 20 years. I still am every once in a while. And I have been working on a TV series that I originally developed with Jeff Abigov, who was a writer producer for Cheers, Golden Girls, Roseanne, Two and a Half Men. And I'm actually just coming from a bit of a retreat that I took at a cabin on the Swanee River, my family's cabin, to finish my pilot episode for Revolution Earth. I've done a few revisions, and I'm very excited about this recent revision that I've finally finished right before this meeting. So yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. It is, hold on a second, I'm about to enter a traffic circle. So basically, the series is like a suspense, like romantic political suspense. And it kind of covers the idea of what would it take to create an environmental revolution that saves the world. So it's very all encompassing. And of course, that's going to need to fold in cooling as part of the strategy. So, I honestly, my whole, this entire time I've been working on climate, the idea for this series is what launched me into the climate realm, because I knew I wanted to write a series and I didn't know much about it. And so I've been basically researching for over a decade.
Well, I would love to talk more with you about that. And, I definitely want to see more of that sort of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think many of these conversations, coming from the perspective of our members, I'm hoping that people will pick up your email address, which is right there in the announcement, get back to you one-on-one so that you can have those conversations. There are several of these from that. So thank you.
I would love to. I also just want to say one more thing is I think it's going to be really important for us to reach people where they're at.
Yes,
there's a lot of conversations about health, general well-being, corruption. My friend Jen did a documentary called The Brainwashing of My Dad. And it was all about how right-wing think tanks took over the media and what strategies they used to really meet people where they were at and change opinions. So, I mean, that's a brilliant documentary. And I also, there's so much. I'd love to speak about this further. I have been working on this for a while and have multiple friends who've been working on it as well. And Hollywood Climate Summit is another resource that, would be,
Yeah, thank you, Aria.
Cool. Thank you, Aria.
Any reaction?
Definitely.
I think it's good that you and Aria get together.
Yes. Yeah. I agree.
Yeah.
Love
Aria,
that.
by the way, is the co-chair of our media and communications team at the Healthy Planet Action Coalition, along with Jonathan Cole. Yes, so now let's go to Robert Chris, John Dixon, and then back to Robert Tulip.
Hi. Sorry, I missed most of your presentation, Paul. but I'll listen to it on catch up on another occasion. But I just want to pick up on this conversation that was being had earlier about biochar, because it just intrigued me. You're saying that biochar is one of the major sources of carbon credits, carbon removal, and that Microsoft is a player. So the implication of that is that Microsoft are buying lots of
I don't know if that's actually the case. Let me look up the numbers for you.
Well,
Yeah, I'm not
don't worry too much about the detail. But
Yeah.
the point I wanted to get to here is that I understand completely that biochar has got all sorts of environmental benefits by incorporating the biochar in the soil and so on and so forth. But what I am struggling to get to, and I'd be grateful for your insight here, is how biochar can make a meaningful contribution to any kind of climatic objective that you might have. Because as far as I can see, biochar essentially is a cottage industry, and it's not scalable.
I would say all of CDR at this point falls.
Yeah, well, I mean, sorry, let me be clearer. I think that biochar is incapable of being scaled. Not that it isn't now, but it can never be scaled because of its intrinsic nature. So it's great environmentally, and people should do it, low-hanging fruit and all the rest. But it is, unless I have got this completely wrong, it can never make a worthwhile contribution to any kind of climate change objective, any climate policy. Have I got that wrong?
So the way I think about CDR is, let's zoom out and assume that things are more possible than they actually are. I mean, the IPCC goal, as I mentioned, is 10 billion tons per year by 2050. I think that's way underselling it. Like our actual, if we were serious about this, our actual goal would be like 60 billion tons per year by that point.
You're talking about CO2, not carbon.
I'm talking about CO2. 60 billion tons of CO2 by 2050. That would be an actual goal that would like if we were reaching net zero on emissions reduction, and then we have a lot of carbon debt to pay down, basically. And so then you start running the numbers like, okay, let's go through all of the different methods of carbon removal that are available to us. And biochar is probably single-digit billions. I would put soil carbon at like 4 billion tons. And this is like at the maximum capacity. We're not going to do this. You've got like afforestation, which I've seen estimates ranging from 2 billion up to 20 billion. I would assume more on the lower end. You've got enhanced rock weathering, biomass burial, direct air capture, macroalgae, like all these different things. And you have to piece all of these together. Nature-based solutions at most could probably do like 10 to 20 billion tons per year, like at most. And so then the rest has to come from engineered approaches. And that's going to require energy on like a 10x scale from what we're even capable of producing today. So I would say like yes and no to your question. It's like, yes, that is a critical, it would be a critical component, but it would just be like one piece in this larger puzzle. And like how we get from where we are today to that point is almost unimaginable at the moment. So that's, if I can assume, there are a lot of people who work in biochar who are very, very pro biochar, almost to the point of zealotry. And and people do this in the regenerative space too. I think people just get like a little too, one true God about it. And we need all of these. And we need all of them scaling up as much as possible. And there will be barriers to overcome with all of them. And there's more, in my opinion, there's more than enough room for like every carbon removal methodology.
Yeah, and briefly, I would confirm we worked in biochar for half a decade, and we should distinguish scalability and distributed application. I think if globally, we adopted biochar inefficiently on a global scale, 1 to 3 gigatons of carbon removal could be feasible each year. But like Paul said, let's get the first gigaton and then decide how sustainable it is on land and in the sea and what the equilibrium rate should be. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see similar figures for the oceans as well.
But thanks,
Yeah,
Paul. Well said.
I think
Yeah.
I think that one needs to be really careful with these numbers because the numbers you're giving there are for the biomass, not for the charcoal. And the
That's not true. That is not true. We actually did a detailed analysis with the Gates Foundation, and if applied globally, 1 to 3 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent should be feasible in terms of removals.
Yeah.
And how many charcoal plants would that require? How much materials movement would that require? And so
well, Robert, at a small scale, the pyrolyzers are very effective. At a large scale, gasifiers are used. And that's why it's a distributed technology, but it's also scalable. I've got one back here with two barrels.
We're running down a rabbit hole here, guys. Please communicate bilaterally on this. There's a whole lot to know about this subject. Let me go on to John Dixon and then Greg. John?
Thanks very much, Dennis. I think it is a fascinating conversation, and one of the things I like about it is we're talking about not just one or a single options. We're talking about everything together, and I think that's very rich conversation on the way to approach our climate action and crisis. However, Paul, I was fascinated by your story, your personal journey. And I really like your Light the Beacon and its sort of literature origins. That's just excellent, huh? Lord of the Rings and all that. What I'd like to take you back to your 3 pillars.
Yeah, sure.
Of Light the Beacon, and I'd like to, if you could tell us your dreams about the ways in which you will contribute really to change at scale, because it's a bit like what's the really best possible world in terms of impact at scale that could emerge, and maybe multiple actors are involved in that, but just talk us through that best dream.
Yeah, that is a great question. So I've been talking about this with my team internally, and we find it a little bit difficult to describe ourselves because in some ways we're sort of like trying to become a media production studio, but also not. And the ways in which we want to go about this are fairly unorthodox. So my dream would, let me talk about more logistics. For instance, we've been putting together a roadmap of like what's actually achievable in the first 6 to 12 months, assuming that we have funding to manage that. Well, like getting to the point of a feature film or a high profile TV series, that's the white whale. And that takes a long time. That could take years to develop. Or a AAA video game would also probably take 5 years or more to develop. That's a really long, and as we've all talked about, like don't really have time for that, right? So what can we do that's quicker? So all the way down, like the cheapest and fastest idea we've come up with is a graphic novel. You could probably commission that for $5,000 US and have that done in a couple months. And you can self-publish and use traditional digital marketing mechanics to distribute that. So that's like a starting point. And then moving on from there, I really want to have a large impact in like in social media. So there was a book and then a movie called Moneyball, which is about like identifying with statistics like the most likely to be useful baseball players, and that's sort of taken for granted as like the default operational approach that like all sports teams do today. But that was novel when Billy Beane started doing that, and I want to do a similar kind of thing for like up and coming creators online. So. For instance, we've looked at examples of Instagram accounts that are making AI films in a micro series fashion. So imagine like a 2 or 3 minute little episode in this series, and then it just kind of moves on to the next. There are a bunch of people doing this, and they might have 500,000 or 1 million followers. that's a time to find those people. They're not going to be that expensive relative to someone who has like 20 million followers, and then work with them and try to develop this kind of content. So that's the more near term and medium term. To your question about like the larger dream, I would want to, I would feel like we've made an impact if people are saying that like they watched something or they consumed some sort of content in a way that, and like a lot of people said this in a way that like really convinced them, oh, cooling interventions are really necessary, and like I totally see how we could do that. Why aren't we doing that? That would be that's the actual goal, that cultural movement of getting people to say, why aren't we doing this? Can we do this? Maybe we should. Um, and I think of examples like I know there was a film in the US, and I don't remember the name of it, but I know in the UK there was one called Threads that came out in the 80s that really convinced people about the dangers of nuclear war. Or, you know, there have been cultural artifacts like that over time that have dramatically and quickly changed people's perspectives on a either controversial or not well known issue. I would love to see like that level of impact. That's the kind of that would be the sort of ultimate dream of, we put something out there and large swaths of the population comes to believe that this is important and necessary and doable.
Is that 15 years? Or
I don't think so. I think that you
what's the connection through to resolving the climate crisis?
Well, so the connection through is like, there are groups that are doing work similar to HPAC. There are groups that are doing things in the policy sphere. I was just in Helsinki at the Operatio Arctis Atlas 25 conference, which was convening Finnish and European policymakers and bureaucrats to discuss Arctic risk and consideration of SRM and research in that space and that sort of thing. And they need political cover, basically. They need to know that it's safe for them to actually engage on this. It's safe for them politically to engage on it. So that's the objective of Light the Beacons, is to give them that political cover. And I don't think that it takes 15 years. I think that this can go a lot faster, especially using AI tools and modern social media techniques. We need to be using 21st century tools for this 21st century problem.
As a brief example, I was lucky enough to be in part of the 2040 film. And it was 2 years and a couple $1 million. And we had a first-rate director. And we ended up raising hundreds of thousands of dollars for marine permaculture. And then there were probably hundreds of thousands of dollars raised for the other 4 interventions that were described. So the 2040 model wouldn't be bad after the graphic novel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. That was a great exchange, John and Paul. Gregory Slater has been waiting for a long, long time. Greg, now's your chance.
Oh, thanks. I'll try to keep it as short as I can.
Please keep it short as you can, Greg. Please.
Okay. I came late, but I'm curious, Paul, about how you even come up with order of magnitude or the best case numbers, given that all of these technologies depend on buy-in and money, and these are unpredictable. I mean, we've been at it 30 years, we haven't got anywhere. If any of these things were given $1 trillion, any of them, we could cool the earth.
Sure.
But you come up with upper limits. I couldn't come up with an upper limit for any of these things to within 2 orders of magnitude, simply because the behavior of civilization and people is utterly unpredictable in this regard. So I don't even know how to plan beyond trying to do something. So the only other thing I'll say, and I'm sorry for being too wordy, is, I've come to the conclusion how desperation is that we're facing essentially a boot up problem,
and
that is the result of a total ban on any cooling, essentially. I mean, you can point at tiny things, and people can point them out, but they're minuscule, and there is a resistance to still, and this is from intelligent people trying to deal with, from scientists and politicians, to any ban on doing it. You can't even do, even tiny things are banned. So my position is to violate the ban. It is actually, the first step is to just break the ban, and do that in international waters by any of these. I mean, the techniques that can be done there. In the case of SAI, if I can find a way to do a ton, I'm doing it. Single-handedly.
Okay, Greg, what is your question to Paul?
Two questions. How did you show me the work on your upper limits? And I don't see convincing Gen X, Gen whatever people to consider cooling, to actually address the issue of the Buddha problem. Anyway, that's it.
Okay, very good, Paul.
When you say the upper limits, what are you referring to? Which part?
For Robert, you estimated how much you went through the different.
For carbon removal.
We get 10 trillion
carbon removal
tons here, etc. Those numbers.
Yeah.
I mean,
let me help Paul out a bit. The Working Group Report 3 of the IPCC that came out in late 2023 has an elegant chapter with tables on the technical potential of about 50 different methods of carbon removal. And so that would be a place to start your journey, Greg, and the assumptions behind them. But that's briefly what Paul and Chris were reviewing, was these technical potentials and what was behind.
No, I'm talking about the political potential. That's the bottom line, Dennis.
Dennis, I'm hoping to ask a question. So, we've just got 5 minutes. So, do you mind if I jump in?
All right.
So, yeah. I gave a talk at the SRM 30 on calling for an albedo accord, and suggesting that what's required is to identify the commercial industries who stands to lose big time from heat, and so identifying insurance, agriculture, tourism, shipping as those key industries. And so I'd be eager, Paul, to hear your thoughts on the potential of reaching out to those industries and addressing the political problem of the polarization. That's, climate policy is seen as a left-wing thing, but those industries are essentially right-wing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I've thought about this too, especially insurance, agriculture, tourism, construction, and then anything that has outdoor labor components to it. There's an organization called Probable Futures, which I would point you to. So there's a link to it. They're a nonprofit that does a lot of educational work in the space. They sort of like prepare briefings and other useful materials for executives working in those industries. That's a big part of what their objective is. I agree with that. I think that there's some component of that I want to contribute to as well. Haven't figured that out exactly. But I definitely agree that industry pressure is going to be useful. I think that we're generally speaking, and I especially understand this for many of you who have been working in this for a very, very, very long time. I feel like we are at an inflection point now. This year, in fact, I think that it's the combination of like Hanson's work with the U.S. pullback, with rise of populism, and I mean climate pullback. It's not just the U.S., but other places too. So I think there's a growing unease and awareness and realization that we're not on track and we're going to have to do something different. It feels similar to me how adaptation was considered prohibited until like the 2000s, and then carbon removal was considered prohibited until the mid 2010s, and now here we are finally cooling is starting to break. And I think that there is, like, the next couple of years are going to be absolutely critical in terms of getting governments on board, industries on board, and creating that cultural consensus for it. So I agree, and I think that that's a relevant and related part of what I would like to contribute to as well.
Do you see potential for the Montreal Protocol to be a model for an albedo accord?
I don't know. That's not my area of expertise. I like the idea, and I really like. I mean, I keep hearing from the people who are working on policy stuff. They are interested in the sort of notion. I mean, that was what the Operatio Arctis thing was about. Was, can you get Finland on board? And we just see, Iceland just yesterday acknowledging AMOC as a serious risk to their country's well-being. Like, that's the starting point. If you can get a few more countries on board with that, then that I recall Pascal Lamy's talk that was shared during the conference in October, and that sort of concept I think is very viable. I'm not so sure about Montreal. I just don't. I'm not that expert.
So understanding albedo collapse as a security risk.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, very good. Another conversation offline that you could engage in. Our last hand up was Jonathan. Did you still have something to add, Jonathan, before we close?
Yeah, thanks. On your checklist of things to do to promote, you mentioned you're going to be, basically creating a presentation generation company, media company. But going back to the point of trying to put something physical into the hands of school children and maybe colleges even. Have you thought about any kind of contests or projects that would go down through the education system?
Yeah. We have thought about curricula. Contest is something. I was just talking to someone yesterday who did a similar thing in a related field, and I definitely am interested in that kind of thing as well. Because I do believe that there is going to be some element of kids telling their parents, "Hey, you should learn more about this thing." And there are lots of ways to reach them.
Yeah, I think we've had such a rich discussion that we must put on the agenda another conversation with you, Paul, and possibly your colleagues. Because there's so many areas that came up in this discussion that really deserve more conversation and more brainstorming. Because you're in a brainstorming mode, we're developing our agenda, and so much we can do and at least think together about going forward. So if there's no more urgent interventions, we are up against our 1.5 hours exactly. And I'm tempted to say thank you to everyone for a very stimulating conversation. So apologetic for having to cut a few people off, but we do have the tendency to go on and on sometimes, and we need to give other people the chance. But it worked out well in the end, and thank you all so much for joining us. Paul, we are going to consider you as at least an honorary member of the pack here at HVAC, and we're going to keep you in line with what we're doing. I think our membership, we're going to put you on the membership list so you can keep in touch with our schedule of activities.
I think Paul already is, Dennis.
Yeah, I think I am.
Yes. Okay. So we're together, and we want to keep you very much engaged with us as we go forward. So thank you all for joining us.
I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, and see you in a couple of weeks. Bye now.